assignment. What we're focusing on all day today, and what you'll most likely need to finish at home, is creating a brush stroke chart. So it's listed in, let's see, it will be on page 29, brush stroke charts. So, students must take this time to become acclimated with their brushes because after this, you're going to need to know how to use those brushes to make a painting. The goal with this assignment is to create a range of paint application with a set of brushes you'll be working with. While you'll begin it here, you'll most likely need to finish it at home. And I do have, as you can see, some brushes to get you guys started, and this should be enough to last you through today. We have bristle brushes, and then we have some soft brushes that I had on the supply list. And then if anybody gets really far, I do have some synthetic mongoose that you guys can use as well. The instructions indicate to start with a filbert bristle brush, something like, something like this guy. That's actually a flat, but that'll be fine. Starting with a filbert bristle brush, and then make strokes of varying length, a 1-inch stroke, a 3-inch stroke, and then a 6-inch stroke, trying to accomplish the various different brush strokes. So the brush strokes you're trying to emulate are first a scumble, then a dry brush, followed by body paint, followed by impasto, and then we'll do paint that's thinned with a little thinner, and then paint that has the addition of medium. So you're going to see how the brush, how the paint, and how the canvas responds to a variety of different changes. Because you're going to take this chart while you paint, and then when you think about what stroke you need to make, especially for your master copy, you may have to refer back to the brushstroke chart to see, all right, to mimic the stroke I see on this master copy, I need to use this type of brush with this amount of paint, with this amount of medium, and then lay the stroke on it. So that's what instead of you ruining your painting trying to figure out how to get the paint to be applied correctly, you're going to spend this day just figuring out how to use the brushes.
So when you talk about, you know, the 3 and the 6-inch strokes, is that just one load of paint?
One load of paint.
Are you going to show us how to do that? Because I really have a hard time
that's what
loading
we're
my
going to do
brush.
here. Yeah, so that's part of what this assignment is about. You have to figure out how much paint and how much medium needs to be on your brush to be able to accomplish a certain stroke. This will avoid all of your strokes from being the exact same dabby strokes all the way throughout a painting. You may need to add some variety into a painting. So this is a great way to teach you how to do that. So you can focus just on the brush stroke and you don't have to think about the drawing or the color or the value or anything like that. Okay. Let's go ahead and load up the brush a little more.
What stroke is this?
We're going to try and do a body stroke. All right, that's better. So your goal will be to try and get a body stroke, or each of these strokes, a 1-inch, and then a 3-inch, and then a 6-inch. So you're going to have to start piling on a lot more paint to get some of these longer strokes, especially if it's dry brush or if it's a body paint.
And are you sort of working it into the brush? I mean,
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get a 3-inch. I need a little more paint here. Good. 3-inch. It's a little topographical, but I think we'll be all right there. We knock down a little bit.
You say it's too thick? I mean, is that what?
It's a
Topographical.
little too topographical.
So you mean the paint's too stiff, is that what you're saying?
He's saying it's
Sitting
like that.
The
I
brush
think he's got
stroke,
breaking.
the brush stroke has ridges.
Oh.
So that would be something that you'd have to come down here and modify later. But the goal should be to try and get it all at once with one stroke. But yeah, this paint is probably about 25% stiffer than it typically is out of the two for this color, maybe a little more. So it's just a little more difficult to get the stroke without it being a heavily impasto stroke.
And if you had something like that, you had older paints, would you generally, when you're painting, try to use a glaze with it to thin it out a little bit?
No, I would
No?
use those paints for color studies and not for anything permanent.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because the fact that it's stiff like that means it's already begun the oxidation process. It's already started to form paint films in there, so the ultimate
Okay.
film that it forms is going to be less stable. So you don't want to use this paint unless you absolutely have to. So just exercises and studies. Okay, let's see if we can get a dry brush now. I already did the 3-inch one. Let's see if we can do the 6-inch.
So if we have older paint around, can we use that for these assignments?
Yep. So I'm loading the brush up and trying to saturate it all the way inside, but I'm removing the excess. So I didn't have a pile of paint like I did there. It's pretty thin on the brush,
And which are you doing now?
a dry brush. But I'm controlling the pressure of the brush as well. I'm not just trying to force it in there, because if I forced it in there, look how thick it'd be, right? But I'm trying to control the pressure.
So the idea is
achieve
to have
that
the
mark.
stroke look consistent across the distance, yeah?
For this one, yeah.
I mean, for the dry brush as well, right?
Fairly consistent, but part of the reason of dry brush is that
Oh,
it's
I see.
supposed to have a little bit of random distribution through it.
Okay, thank you.
Let's do a medium. Oh no, we're going to do an impasto stroke before we start thinning this stuff out. So impasto, you're going to have to see how much you really need to start piling on a brush. Because if you think about how long 1 inch is and then how to make it topographical and raised off the surface, you need to have enough paint in there to make that happen. So we're talking a big dollop of paint. Something like that. But the real challenge will be a longer stroke.
We just squeeze it out of the tube.
Squeeze that,
Flatten it down a little bit.
Yeah.
something like that. And paying attention to what's happening along the edges as well. Because you'll notice when you start to press really hard, it'll push paint out of the middle and shove it towards the edges. So to get a really good impasto stroke, in fact this is a little messed up there, the goal is to try and get it still localized in the center of the stroke and not just shoved out along the edges.
Do you think that Van Gogh used the brush, like used the paint on the brush to do those strokes?
I don't know, he could have used anything.
Palette knife, maybe?
Palette knife. Well,
it
there's
looks like
more
he
claw
used
marks in
paint.
some of those.
If
And
you
then-
look at them close, you can see the bristle marks.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use brush after you put the paint
Yeah.
on.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true, you could texture it.
Yeah, you can add primer to it that's more impasto as well, modeling paste. But that will most likely crack off, especially if it's on stretched canvas. If you have an intent to actually utilize impasto in your work like this, make sure you're working on board or canvas mounted to board, not on stretched canvas. Because this is going to have some drying issues and some adhesion issues, especially on a flexed surface. So it may end up cracking and flaking off. And restorers will have to spend hours and hours of fixing stuff like they have to do with all the Van Goghs.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they'll be dead.
Yeah,
soon.
that's-
I know, I'm laughing to think that somebody's going to be restoring my,
Hey, let's have a little faith.
As they drag
can
it
do
to the
it.
shredder.
You know, Rembrandt,
can't even give them away.
with,
If
especially
not,
with
if you use
the
good canvas, they may use the
highlight
canvas.
That's right, I might scrape it all up.
Yeah,
used impasto to give that
that's
three-dimensional
why we
look,
use
so
linen,
would,
so that when we
would
scrape
that
our
have
shit
been
off, the root-
mainly brush strokes and things? And
Most
used,
likely, you're talking about Rembrandt?
Rembrandt,
Yeah, he
yeah.
didn't get really thick.
No, but I mean, just on some of the sleeves, the big puffy sleeves,
Yeah.
and he'd highlight the white
Yeah,
and
and
gold.
that's what you'd use the body paint more in the impasto for. This would be just the one thick accent that you want to have really pick up a lot of light in the room. So even the glazers, the Flemish 7-layer technique, the last step of the technique is to put any small impasto marks as needed to pick up available light from the room. Especially if it's going to be lit in a place that's a little bit darker. That little highlight with impasto can pump it up a notch.
On top of the glaze?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's do a thin stroke now. So I'm using some thinner. Do you see how wet that's getting there? Almost soupy, right? So with the thinner, the trick is going to be to figure out how much thinner you need to add to your paint to still make it workable and brushable without dripping down. That's the real challenge, because this is how you're going to be doing a lot of block-ins or a color block-in, often is with thin paint. This is how you're going to be doing a lot of the drawing on your painting, if it's a direct painting. A few marks here and there to indicate the drawing, and then you start going into your actual painting. Now, if you put too much medium, then you're going to do a drawing, and you're going to turn around, and then the painting is going to look like this. Your drawing will melt away. So you need to figure out how much thinner you need to add to be able to effectively lay down the color without it dripping.
Drips are really in.
Drips are in.
Not
So
anymore.
let's see.
Not anymore?
Not anymore?
I like it.
Last year.
I'm sorry.
Like last century.
Last century. That was so 1900s.
That was
We're in the 2000s.
1990s.
1990s.
Yeah, so 90s, exactly.
Yeah, mint green and
Tim was born and they stopped doing it, right?
Yeah. I'm always a step behind. So that's a good amount. It's not dripping yet. So we'll give it a minute and see. It looks like it might be trying to. What you'll notice, which is interesting, the difference between, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on canvas days and why it's important. The difference between a cotton canvas and an acrylic primed cotton canvas versus a linen or an oil primed linen canvas is that a cotton canvas will suck everything up like a paper towel. So it'd be like laying out a sheet of paper towel and then doing the same stroke. You'll notice the paper towel sucks it up and then sort of disperses it so it spreads a little bit. Now, poorly primed canvases and acrylic primed cotton canvases, a lot of them, will have this effect as well. So you'll go to lay in a brush stroke that you intend to be a clean brush stroke with crisp edges, and then it will diffuse and soften and melt away, which is one of the reasons why we don't want to use acrylic primed cotton canvas, or even some acrylic primed linens, because that same spreading effect can happen. So that seemed to be pretty good. Let's get it a little longer than that.
Do they make oil primed cotton?
No.
but you can oil prime a cotton canvas.
No, I
It
know.
just takes a lot, it sucks up. big
There we
time.
go.
Okay.
So you wouldn't advise in our own painting to use acrylic, because I've seen a lot of people tone their canvas with acrylic and then do oils over top of it.
You can, but a lot of times you end up adding it depends on how you paint. But you may end up adding more work for yourself just because you're going to have to go back and readjust the edges after
Okay.
your first coat of oil paint is on there.
Okay.
But then
So
if you
just
put
depends.
acrylic on oil primed, doesn't that lean over fat? And then you put
Yeah, you
fat
wouldn't
over
put
lean over
acrylic.
fat?
You wouldn't put acrylic over oil primed, and acrylic has nothing to do with fat over lean.
Well, it's a very lean paint, right? I mean, there's no
Acrylic,
oil in it.
That's a true statement, but I think that is a topic we should reserve for materials day.
Okay.
The oil will reject the plastic layer of the acrylic, eventually it'll just bubble off.
The oil can be over acrylic, it's
Yeah, I
just the
said
other way.
acrylic over oil.
Oh, yeah, definitely,
The
yeah.
oil
But
comes
You'll
that's what I'm
dry it
saying,
up.
if you're using an
Yeah.
oil primed canvas and then.
Another tool.
Yeah, you
So
can't use
all those
acrylic at
razor
that point.
blades that we use
Yeah.
That's what I
in
was
drawing,
saying.
you can use to clean your palette. I just stole this from somebody in Open Studio because he said he had an extra one and he was nice enough to give it to me. This is just a razor blade that's been put into a holder. So you can get the holder if you want, it doesn't really matter. I've only been using it for a couple weeks and I seem to like it, but sometimes it's tough because if you lose
Yeah.
the holder then Yeah,
Wait
use
till
a
the
rigid
whole-
blade anyway.
Like a-
And what'll happen too, especially if you're painting thicker, is that oil paint will build up in the ridges here, and then it becomes impossible to change it out. And so it ends up being just
I
easier to
hadn't
use
had a
razor blades.
problem. And it keeps your hands away from the, fingers away from the paint, as opposed to the, just the regular way.
That's true.
Just use
You're
your
right.
hand.
Yeah, I've always had.
Okay.
I have that.
Now, I'm trying to get as much of the paint thinner out of my brush as possible.
I just use a putty knife.
Because I don't want this next layer to be thinned, I only want it to be extended. So this is a thinned layer. Now we're going to do an extended layer with some medium.
No, I sharpen it. In a nice sharp.
We got some Winsor Newton medium here.
Yeah. No, in an electric one.
And what will happen, you'll notice, as this starts to dry, the layer that was thinned, the mineral spirits will evaporate and the stroke will look fairly dry because there's not a whole lot of oil there. It's pigment that's been spread out, almost like a drawing. Whereas the film that's been extended, while it may look similar while it's wet, when it dries, it'll have more of a sheen and jewel-like tone because it's got the oil in it. Makes sense. Let's see. Stroke there. I'm going to do a little more. Thin that out. There we go. That's better.
Again, it's a trick to keep it from dripping, or
That's what you're figuring out here.
with this one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
How much can you add? And that, to be fair, that will differ from medium to medium as well. Some mediums are very fluid. Some mediums are very stiff.
Previous didn't have medium at all.
Hmm?
The previous one didn't have medium at
The
all.
previous one had thinner.
Had
Yeah,
thinner, like
yeah,
Gamsol or
yeah.
something. And now that's the Winsor Newton medium. you're
Yep.
using.
A little bit of dry brush action in there. There we go. That's better. All right. Yeah, that's the Winsor Newton medium. So you'll notice that'll dry with a lot more sheen. These look fairly similar now, but when dry, they'll look very, very different because one is thinned and one is extended.
But then it'll be flatter, matter, right?
Yeah, this will be very matte.
Yeah.
Notice too, when I did the brush strokes, I did not have my brush like this, right? I had my brush like this. Do you see the difference there? This versus this. And this is going to be very important because if you start to develop layers on your paint and you're in the habit of laying down paint like this,
Yeah.
then you're going to scrape off all the paint underneath and or cause it all to mix together and turn into mush. So just like remember how we held our pencil to draw, just like this, and then we reach in, now we hold our paintbrush the same way. We load it up, we pull it across. That's how we make a paint stroke mark. I'll demonstrate just a little bit with the soft brush, and then I'm going to let you go to work. But these are the 6 primary strokes that I want everybody to have. Dry brush, impasto, dry brush, body paint, impasto, thin, thick. Scumble. Forgot a scumble. Okay, I need to clean my brush out completely to create a scumble. I don't want any medium in there. I don't want any thinner in there. It's just going to be body paint, where I've removed as much of the oil from my brush as possible, reducing it more to pigment. This is going to be very similar to if we were, say, dipping a brush into a puddle of charcoal and scrubbing the charcoal on.
You also have another one that says thin with medium and a soft on-off action.
Yeah, I'll do that with.
I didn't know if you wanted to do it before you got that brush clean.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
Because I can go back to that.
Okay.
All right, so I'm loading the brush up. And just so you know, scumbles are suited mostly for bristle brushes because scrubbing action, whereas a thin brush, you're going to destroy it if you push too hard on it. Bristle brushes, you can really work them in there.
Isn't it better with the short brush? Bristle?
Short
Bright,
bristle,
is it?
yeah.
Yeah, a bright, yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. It just depends on the effect you want. For a more controlled scumble, then yes. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So see how this is just a,
Oh, so with the scumble, you're getting a sort of a finer texture than with a dry brush.
Yeah.
typically, yeah. Because a dry brush, you're really picking up the just sort of random peaks, yeah. This, you're still mostly picking up the peaks, it's just you're picking up more of the peaks, yeah. So this will act nicely to sort of just accent an area of paint, and here's a thicker scumble here.
So you
Until you
don't,
said, oh, go ahead.
you don't really push the brush into
No, yeah, I'm not, well, you can. It just depends on how much you've loaded. If you put a lot of paint on here and then you push it in, that's not gonna work. So you'll have to remove the excess, and then even that was too much,
You're,
and then
you're,
push it
you're
in.
taking the medium out too, as much as possible.
Well, there shouldn't be any medium on there,
Oh, I don't.
but yeah, take the
For,
oil out.
Scumbling?
Was
Using body paint from it?
Yeah, using body paint
For scumble.
for scumble, yeah. Now this is gonna be important to figure out and learn how to use, because we're going to be building up what's called an open grisaille painting with it. And an open grisaille painting is a painting using the white of the canvas as your white, just like a drawing would be. And you're going to be allowing this to set up and dry a little, and then you're going to be scumbling on a layer on top of it, and then allowing that to dry a little, and keep scumbling up. So over the course of a few days, we'll build up an entire, it'll be a black and white painting using just this scumbling method. So you're going to need to learn how to use a scumble.
So the scumble will also be part of the creating values?
Yeah. Well, when we use it as a open grisaille, it will, yeah.
How do you handle a sharp edge with a scumble if you need?
Aha, yes, that's really challenging. You just have to shift more towards body paint.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the case of an open grisaille, because this paint layer film is so thin, and because you'll be working on oil-primed linen, you can actually use a paper towel to remove some, or a paper towel dipped with thinner to remove some paint, or even your white click eraser. Your white click eraser will erase this just like it's charcoal, because it's almost like charcoal. Instead of pigment with a little bit of clay binder, this is pigment with a little bit of oil binder. So it's almost the same thing as charcoal. So here's just a small brush so we can scumble in smaller details. But yeah, you will notice with the scumble, edges typically tend to be quite a bit softer, right? And that's just the very nature of a scumble. But this is good for also if, say, you're painting a head and you need to add a little bit of light to a cheek or forehead. You can just scumble in the area, and then it'll diffuse nicely to the paint underneath, and so it'll help you turn the form and make something look round nicely. Does that make sense? Let's see if we can do one of those soft on, soft off. We'll use some medium here. So this is one last thing that I'd like you to do. It's easier to achieve with one of your softer brushes or one of the mongoose brushes, but getting a really gentle beginning of the stroke, and then a firm placement in the middle of the stroke, and then a lighter touch towards the end of the stroke. So it's sort of a soft on and then soft off. And this will be really paramount for being able to handle a lot of edge work in here and trailing off brush work and things like that. You don't want every stroke to just abruptly start and end, because then things will start to look really choppy. If you want things to flow into each other, especially if you're working paint, wet into wet, you're going to need to learn this sort of gentle application on, and then hitting the stroke hard right in the middle where you need the most paint, and then gently coming off. So just more horizontal or parallel to the canvas surface in this case, and it's just soft on, more in the middle, and then soft off. So these edges will sort of lock into other layers of paint to help diffuse them, sort of like a broken edge.
So that, and that's done with thinner? Or can you
Thinner
do it
or
with
medium.
any?
Yeah,
any?
thinner or medium. You'll most likely use medium, because that'll be the layer of paint that you'll be at. That wasn't good. You need to think about where your brush is in relation to the canvas. No, there's too much medium there. There we go. There, that's what we're looking for right there. So you want to try and repeat the stroke until you can get that softness going on and softness going off. It's much easier to get it going off than it is to get it going on, because when it's on leading into the stroke, you have to pay attention to where your brush is and how it's angled towards the canvas and where you're going to hit it, and also whether or not your brush is splayed. If you're working with something like a mongoose, this doesn't splay very well. These softer brushes aren't intended to splay. But a mongoose will have a little more of a claw-like, feathery action, so you'll get a little bit of more of that soft feather touch on and feather touch off. A little dry brush in there.
Is there a term for that?
Not that I've heard. Soft on, soft off. Wax on, wax off. So the goal is going to be to reproduce these strokes with each of your brushes. At least start with just a regular size, maybe 1/3 of an inch or so brush, and then if time permits or at home, upgrade to your larger brushes. We don't think about it as much, but when you start getting into brushes that are, this size, you end up needing a lot of paint to be able to substantiate a stroke like that. And when beginners or students are trying to work with a brush this big, which a lot of instructors have them do to practice simplification, they don't realize how much paint they need to fill that brush. And then they end up thinning the paint too much and having some disastrous effects because of that. So this should help you become just aware of what you need on your brushes to be able to accomplish the stroke.